The Ledger of Lies, Aunt Clara's Secret Diary, Chapter 1, The Funeral and the Forgotten Room, Charleston, South Carolina, 2024. The air hung heavy, thick with the humid sorrow of a low-country funeral. My Aunt Clara's passing had been sudden, a silent heart attack in her sleep, a peaceful end for a woman whose life had always seemed to hum with quiet efficiency. She was the anchor of our family, the quiet, observant matriarch who listened more than she spoke. Her silver hair always impeccably coiffed, her hands always busy knitting or tending her prized camellias. The funeral itself was a blur of black dresses, hushed condolences, and the cloying scent of lilies. We buried her in the historic Magnolia Cemetery, under the shade of ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss, a fitting final resting place for a woman so steeped in the traditions of Charleston. After the graveside service, the family gathered at Aunt Clara's sprawling Ancestral home, a grand old southern mansion on East Bay Street, overlooking the harbor. It was a house frozen in time, filled with antique furniture, faded tapestries, and the lingering scent of lavender and old paper. Aunt Clara had lived there alone for decades, a spinster by choice, or so we believed. As the eldest niece, I, Sarah Miller, felt a responsibility to help my cousin, David, Aunt Clara's only living nephew, sort through her belongings. He lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and had a busy life with his young family. I, a freelance historical researcher, lived just a few blocks away in a cozy bungalow, and Aunt Clara's house had always been a second home, a place of quiet refuge. Her bedroom was the last place we tackled. It was surprisingly Spartan for such a grand house, reflecting her minimalist nature. The four-poster bed was neatly made, a lace doily on the bedside table, a worn Bible. Everything was in its place, just as Aunt Clara would have wanted. "We should probably change the linens," I suggested to David, gesturing to the bed. Before the estate sale, as I pulled back the heavy lace comforter, my hand brushed against something hard under her pillow. It wasn't flat. It felt like a small, leather-bound book. My brow furrowed. Aunt Clara was meticulous. She never left anything out of place, and she certainly wasn't one for sentimental keepsakes under her pillow. "What's this?" I murmured, reaching under. My fingers closed around a small, leather-bound diary, its cover intricately embossed. It looked old, almost antique, but clearly well-preserved. It wasn't locked. A diary? David peered over my shoulder, surprised. Aunt Clara kept a diary? I thought she only wrote in ledgers for her gardening. Aunt Clara had indeed kept meticulous ledgers for everything. Her garden, her finances, even the weather. But a personal diary? It seemed entirely out of character for such a private, reserved woman. My heart began to beat a little faster. There was something about the diary's weight, its secret placement, that suggested it held more than mundane daily entries. It felt like a hidden vault. "I think I should probably go through this alone, David," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It might be private. Maybe just personal reflections." David, bless his practical nature, nodded. "Good idea. If it's anything important for the estate, just let me know. I'll be downstairs with the lawyers." I sat on the edge of the bed, the diary clutched in my hands, a profound sense of anticipation washing over me. The room, once a symbol of Aunt Clara's quiet order, now felt charged with an unspoken secret. The smell of lavender seemed to intensify. I opened the diary. The first few pages were indeed mundane. Weather observations, notes on her camellia blooms, grocery lists. But then, about a third of the way through, the handwriting changed slightly. It became more hurried, more intense, and the dates shifted, leaping back, sometimes decades, then forward again. It wasn't a chronological diary. It was a ledger of memories, revisited and rewritten. My eyes scanned the pages, jumping from date to date, person to person. And then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Myra Vance. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who had died before I was born. A woman Aunt Clara rarely, if ever, spoke of. The entry was dated 1958. It detailed a secret, a profound family secret, one that directly contradicted everything I knew about my family's history, about my own mother's past. The diary wasn't just a record of Aunt Clara's thoughts. It was a rewritten history, a carefully constructed narrative that with every turning page threatened to unravel the very fabric of my family's identity, exposing a series of lies that stretched back generations, all hidden under her pillow in a quiet, forgotten room. The funeral was over, but a new, unsettling chapter of our family history had just begun. Chapter 2. The Threads Unravel. Charleston, South Carolina, 2024. The diary clutched in my hands felt like a ticking bomb. The entry dated 1958, mentioning Myra Vance, my grandmother, spoke of a secret that shattered my family's foundation. Everything I knew, everything I believed about my lineage began to unravel with each turning page. Aunt Clara's diary wasn't a simple chronicle of daily life. It was a meticulously crafted, fragmented narrative, filled with coded references, crossouts, and annotations, almost like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She had revisited past events, rewriting them from a perspective I never knew existed, painting a picture of deception that spanned generations. The first shocking revelation involved my maternal grandmother, Myra Vance. We had always been told she was a genteel Southern belle from a prominent Virginia family who had met and married my grandfather, a dashing military officer from Washington, D.C., during World War II. They settled in Charleston, built their lives, and had my mother, Eleanor, their only child. But Clara's diary painted a different picture. Myra Vance, according to the diary, was not the refined Southern lady we imagined. She was Myra Schmidt, a German immigrant who had arrived in the U.S. in the late 1930s, fleeing persecution, with a dark secret in her past. The entry detailed how Myra had met a young, idealistic American soldier, my grandfather, during the war. She had fallen in love, but terrified of her past being exposed, she had fabricated an entire backstory, a genteel Southern identity, to fit in, to escape her trauma, and to protect her new family. Aunt Clara, Myra's younger sister, had been complicit in this deception, sworn to secrecy. My head reeled. My grandmother, a German immigrant named Schmidt, not Vance? This was a monumental lie, hidden for over 80 years. I continued to read, frantically turning pages. The diary wasn't just about Myra. It was about Clara's own life, intertwined with this family secret, and how it had shaped her. The next shocking thread involved my mother, Eleanor. She had always been a solitary child, quietly reserved, and we attributed it to her being an only child and her parents being older. But Clara's diary suggested something more. Clara had raised my mother, not Myra. An entry from 1960 detailed a profound tragedy. Myra's illness worsened. The secret was too much, the burden too heavy. It then spoke of Myra's quiet, devastating descent into a severe mental illness, exacerbated by the constant fear of exposure. She had become withdrawn, unable to care for her young daughter, my mother. It wasn't a physical illness, as we were told, but a mental breakdown, carefully concealed from the outside world to protect the family's manufactured reputation. Aunt Clara, then a young woman, had stepped in. She became my mother's primary caregiver, nurturing her, raising her, shielding her from Myra's deteriorating state, all while maintaining the facade of a normal family life. My grandfather, burdened by his wife's illness and his military career, was largely absent, leaving Clara to bear the brunt of this profound secret. My mother, Eleanor, had believed Clara was just her devoted aunt, never knowing she was, in essence, her surrogate mother, the quiet, unsung hero of her childhood. The diary was a testament to Clara's immense sacrifice, her quiet strength. She had given up her own dreams, her own chance at a family, to protect her sister and raise her niece. This was why she had never married, never left Charleston, always remaining in that ancestral home. It was her duty, her prison, and her deepest love. The final, devastating revelation involved me. An entry from the early 1990s, when I was a child. Sarah asks too many questions, so much like Myra. The truth could break her. Clara had been watching me, observing my curious nature, my interest in family history, and had carefully steered me away from anything that might uncover the truth. She had subtly, gently diverted my research interests, ensuring I wouldn't stumble upon family archives that might expose the deception. Her silence wasn't just about her privacy. It was about protecting her grand deception, her life's work. I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of my family, the air thick with revelations. My grandmother, not who I thought she was. My mother, raised by her aunt. Not her biological mother, who had descended into mental illness, and Aunt Clara, the quiet guardian, sacrificing her life to protect these secrets, twisting the narrative, ensuring the facade remained intact. I looked at a framed photograph on the bedside table, a young Aunt Clara standing beside a beautiful, haunted-looking woman, Myra. Their resemblance was striking, a genetic thread undeniable. But the Myra in the photo was a stranger to me, not the image of the strong, resilient matriarch I had always been told about. The diary was not just a book. It was a ledger of lies, carefully kept, meticulously revisited, revealing a history rewritten, a family built on a foundation of deception, fear, and profound sacrifice. The threads of my family's history, once so neatly woven, had completely unraveled, leaving me with a raw, terrifying truth and a world turned upside down. The funeral had ended, but the real mourning, the mourning for a lost history, had just begun. Chapter 3: Confrontations and Cracks. Charleston, South Carolina, 2024. The revelations from Aunt Clara's diary were a seismic shock, rattling the foundations of my perception of my family. My grandmother, Myra Schmidt, not Vance, a German immigrant with a hidden past. My mother, Eleanor, raised by Clara, not Myra, who had suffered a debilitating mental illness. And Aunt Clara herself, the quiet guardian, sacrificing her life to maintain a meticulously crafted deception. The weight of this rewritten history was crushing. I knew I couldn't keep this secret. It was too monumental, too profound. It affected not just me, but my mother, my cousin David, and our entire family legacy. But how do you tell your aging mother that her entire childhood, her perception of her own mother, was a carefully constructed lie? I started with my mother Eleanor. She was now in her early 70s, still quiet and reserved, but with a gentle demeanor. I invited her to my bungalow, choosing a neutral, safe space. I spoke slowly, carefully, holding the diary in my trembling hands. "Mom," I began, my voice a little breathless, "I found something under Aunt Clara's pillow. a diary. It tells a very different story about our family. I showed her the first entries about Myra Schmidt, the German immigrant. Her eyes, usually so serene, widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about? Sarah? Grandma Myra was from Virginia, a Vance." As I continued to read excerpts detailing Myra's fabricated past, her descent into mental illness, and Clara's role as her true caregiver, my mother's face grew paler and paler. Tears welled in her eyes, silent and profound. "Clara raised me?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "Grandma Myra? She wasn't well? Why would Aunt Clara keep this from me? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Her voice was laced with a deep, heartbreaking pain, a sense of betrayal, and a profound, belated understanding of her own solitary childhood. It was devastating to witness her distress. I held her hand, offering what comfort I could. "She was protecting you, Mom, and Grandma Myra. She thought she was doing what was best." The initial shock for my mother was followed by a profound sense of loss. Loss for the mother she thought she knew, and loss for the truth of her own childhood, but also a quiet, growing appreciation for Aunt Clara's immense sacrifice. The cracks in our family narrative were opening, raw and painful. Next, I spoke with David, my cousin in Atlanta, Georgia. He was equally stunned, though perhaps less emotionally invested than my mother. "A German immigrant? My grandmother? This is incredible. Why the elaborate deception?" He too expressed admiration for Aunt Clara's dedication, but questioned the wisdom of such a long-held secret. The extended family, when the news eventually trickled out, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and sometimes quiet judgment. Some felt betrayed, others felt a new compassion for Aunt Clara. The carefully polished image of the Vance family was shattered, revealing the complex, sometimes painful truths beneath. The diary also revealed more about Aunt Clara's own life. She had been courted by a young lawyer in the 1960s, a man named Thomas Sterling from Richmond, Virginia. An entry described her profound love for him, her dreams of marriage and children. But the secret of Myra's illness, the fear of exposure, the burden of caregiving, it had prevented her from pursuing her own happiness. She couldn't risk bringing a stranger into their meticulously constructed world of lies. She had broken off the engagement, feigning a lack of interest in marriage, and watched him leave Charleston, her heart breaking in silence. The revelation of this lost love, this unfulfilled dream, added another layer of pathos to Clara's life. She wasn't just a guardian of secrets, she was a casualty of them. The unearthing of these truths inevitably led to questions about legacy, about inheritance. The house on East Bay Street, the family heirlooms, the considerable but not vast fortune Clara had carefully managed. Were they truly ours? Did Myra Schmidt have other heirs? Other living relatives in Germany or elsewhere? I, as a historical researcher, felt compelled to delve deeper. Armed with the new information from the diary, the true name, the approximate dates of immigration, I began my own research. I hired a genealogist specializing in European records. I meticulously searched online archives, immigration records, German census data. It was a painstaking process, but fueled by a need for complete understanding. The initial findings were sparse, but compelling. Myra Schmidt had indeed existed. Records from Hamburg, Germany, showed a family with that surname, victims of persecution, some having fled, others tragically lost. There was a faint, tantalizing possibility of distant relatives, a branch of the Schmidt family, still living. The cracks in our family's narrative were not just opening. They were revealing a hidden lineage, a lost history, and the potential for new, unexpected connections. The Ledger of Lies, Aunt Clara's secret diary, had not only rewritten our history, but now demanded that we confront the truth, however painful, and potentially embrace a whole new, unknown family. The confrontations were just beginning, and the unraveled threads were leading me further back into a hidden past, into a history far richer and more complex than I had ever imagined. Chapter 4: The Path to Truth. Charleston, South Carolina, 2024. The revelations from Aunt Clara's diary had ignited a fervent quest for truth. My mother, Eleanor, was slowly grappling with the profound impact of the deception surrounding Myra's true identity and her own childhood. David, my cousin in Atlanta, Georgia, watched from a distance, supportive but less personally invested. But for me, Sarah Miller, a historical researcher by trade, the diary was a call to action, an undeniable imperative to unearth the full, unvarnished truth of our family's past. Armed with Myra's true name, Schmidt, and the clues from Aunt Clara's cryptic entries, I embarked on a rigorous genealogical search. I focused on German immigration records, Holocaust survivor lists, and post-war refugee archives. It was a painstaking, emotionally taxing process, often leading down dead ends, but my determination was unwavering. I worked with a genealogist specializing in European lineage and Jewish heritage. As the diary hinted at persecution, we traced the Schmidt family back to a small village near Frankfurt, Germany. The records were grim. Many family members had perished during the Holocaust. Myra, born in 1918, had indeed immigrated to the United States in 1938, just before the war erupted, on a manifest listing her as Myra Schmidt, destination New York City. She had lost everything and everyone she knew. Her transformation into Myra Vance was not just a desire for social acceptance, but a desperate act of survival, a way to shed a painful, dangerous identity. The genealogist discovered something else. Myra had an older brother, Carl Schmidt, who had also immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1930s, seeking a safer life. He had settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, changed his name to Charles Smith, and built a new life, convinced his entire family had been lost in Europe. He had married, had children, and passed away in the late 1990s. This meant Myra had a brother, and that brother had descendants, living relatives, an entirely unknown branch of our family tree, carrying the true Schmidt name. I felt a profound mix of elation and trepidation. How do you approach people and tell them their long-deceased aunt was actually your grandmother who had a hidden life? I decided to try to contact Carl Schmidt's, now Charles Smith's, living descendants. It was a delicate process. Through public records and a lot of careful research, I found a contact for his eldest grandchild, a woman named Anna Peterson, living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was in her early 60s, a retired teacher. I wrote a long, detailed letter to Anna, introducing myself, explaining what I had discovered, including excerpts from Aunt Clara's diary and Myra's immigration records. I knew it was a shot in the dark, but I had to try. Weeks passed. I received no reply. I feared I had overstepped, perhaps caused distress. Then one evening my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. "Is this Sarah Miller?" a hesitant female voice asked. "Yes, it is," I replied. "This is Anna Peterson," the voice said. "From Minneapolis. I received your letter. I don't know what to say. It's unbelievable." Her voice was filled with a mix of disbelief and dawning wonder. We talked for hours. Anna confirmed that her grandfather, Charles Smith, had indeed immigrated from Germany, but had always spoken vaguely about his past, claiming he had no living family after the war. She remembered him being haunted by something, a deep sadness. She had always wondered. Myra was my grandmother's sister, I explained. Your grandfather's sister. She arrived later. She was desperate to disappear, to leave her past behind. Aunt Clara helped her create a new identity. Anna was speechless. So my great-aunt, who I thought was lost forever, lived a full life in Charleston, with a whole new family? We shared details, filling in the blanks. The parallels were astonishing. Both Myra and Carl Charles had buried their pasts, creating new identities in America, convinced they were the last of their family, all to escape the pervasive trauma of persecution. The revelation of this lost lineage was not just a personal shock. It was a profound historical moment for both our families. It represented the quiet, hidden stories of countless immigrants and Holocaust survivors who had to erase their pasts to build a future. Anna and I decided to meet. She flew to Charleston. We met at my home, the very place where Aunt Clara's diary had been found. It was an incredibly emotional reunion, a bridge built across decades of silence and deception. We shared photos, stories, piecing together a fuller, more complex picture of Myra Schmidt and Carl Charles's. Anna saw the resemblance between Myra and my mother, Eleanor, and between Myra and Clara. The family connection was undeniable. We decided to gently introduce her to my mother, Eleanor, once she was ready. The path to truth had been circuitous, painful, but ultimately profoundly enriching. Aunt Clara's ledger of lies had not only shattered our family's fabricated history, but had opened a door to a lost past, reconnecting a family long thought extinguished. The discovery of Anna and the Schmidt lineage was a testament to the enduring power of truth and the unexpected ways in which hidden histories can finally come to light, bringing with them a new understanding of resilience, sacrifice, and the unbreakable threads of kinship. The journey had just broadened, revealing an entire unknown branch of our family tree. Chapter 5: Reconciliations and Redefinitions, Charleston, South Carolina, 2025. The full truth of Myra Schmidt's identity, her trauma, her fabricated life as Myra Vance, and Aunt Clara's lifelong sacrifice to maintain that deception, had rippled through our family. The unearthing of her brother Carl's lineage and the connection with Anna Peterson from Minneapolis, Minnesota, had redefined our understanding of who we were. The initial shock for my mother, Eleanor, gave way to a profound, complex grief. Grief for the mother she never truly knew, grief for the unspoken suffering Myra had endured, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood she experienced, shadowed by a hidden illness and cared for by an aunt she never knew was essentially her surrogate mother. But alongside this grief, a new depth of love and admiration for Aunt Clara emerged. Her silent devotion, her unwavering protection, now made painful sense. The meeting between my mother, Eleanor, and Anna Peterson, Myra's great-niece and Carl Schmidt's granddaughter, was incredibly poignant. Two branches of a family, separated by war, persecution, and decades of silence, finally came together. There were tears, shared photographs, and a quiet sense of shared history. It was a testament to the fact that even the deepest secrets can eventually yield profound connections. I, Sarah Miller, continued my research, delving deeper into the Schmidt family history in Germany, compiling a comprehensive family tree that now included the lost German branch. I also documented Aunt Clara's silent sacrifices, honoring her love for Myra and Eleanor, ensuring her story was truly understood, not just as a keeper of secrets, but as a silent hero. The grand old house on East Bay Street in Charleston, once a museum of static history, now felt alive with the echoes of the past, filled with stories both painful and powerful. We decided, as a family, not to sell it immediately. Instead, we began the painstaking process of organizing Aunt Clara's extensive archives, her ledgers, her photographs, and of course, her diary. The diary itself became a sacred text, a window into a past that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. It was a constant reminder of the layers of truth that can exist within a family and the profound impact of historical events on individual lives. Our family began to re-evaluate our narrative, our identity. We were no longer just the Vances of Charleston, but the Vance Schmidts, a family with roots in Germany, shaped by immigration, survival, and the quiet acts of courage that often go unseen. It was a richer, more complex, and ultimately more authentic identity. The unmasking of these truths brought moments of profound reconciliation. My mother, Eleanor, found a new understanding and appreciation for her own quiet nature, seeing it as a reflection of Myra's inherent sensitivity and Clara's protective silence, rather than simply her own disposition. She began to speak more openly about her childhood, shedding some of the unspoken burdens she had carried. The process also brought me a deeper understanding of Aunt Clara, her reserved nature, her solitary life, her seemingly eccentric devotion to her garden, and her meticulous ledgers. It all made sense. She had lived a life of profound responsibility, silently carrying the weight of her sister's secret and her niece's well-being. Her final act, placing that diary under her pillow, was, in its own way, a final confession, a desire for the truth to eventually emerge once she was no longer there to bear its burden. The ledger of lies had been a catalyst, a hidden key that unlocked generations of untold stories. It had forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, to dismantle cherished myths, but in doing so, it had paved the way for a deeper, more honest connection to our past and to each other. The funeral for Aunt Clara had marked an ending, but the discovery of her diary had marked a new beginning, a redefinition of our family history, a series of profound reconciliations, and a testament to the enduring power of truth, however painful, to ultimately lead to a deeper understanding, a richer heritage, and an unwavering sense of who we truly are, forever bound by the complex, beautiful threads of our rewritten history. The past was no longer a polished facade, but a living, breathing tapestry of courage, sacrifice, and enduring love.